You look at a MotoGP bike, and it doesn't just say fast, it threatens it. Then you see a WorldSBK machine, still a monster, but one that could sneak past your driveway without raising suspicion. Both are built to win, but under the fairings, they're speaking two completely different languages. 10. Rider feedback and feel. Climb onto a MotoGP bike, and it's like stepping into the mind of a perfectionist. Everything is tuned to work at such a high level that it almost hides what's going on beneath you until it doesn't. You're riding on the edge, but the electronics, the chassis stiffness, and the sheer grip mean that small mistakes often get masked, right up to the point they don't. When they let go, they really let go. It's a bit like walking on a glass floor that's perfectly solid until the one panel that isn't. A WorldSBK machine, by contrast, never stops talking to you. You feel every little twitch, every subtle change in grip, every time the rear wants to step out. It's constantly feeding you information, and that can be both comforting and exhausting. The feedback loop is immediate. Good riders can use it to make micro adjustments mid-corner, while less experienced ones might just get spooked. This difference is partly down to the production-based origins of the chassis and the tire characteristics, but it's also philosophical. Superbikes are about giving the rider raw data. MotoGP is about giving the rider a scalpel-sharp platform to execute a plan. Which you prefer depends entirely on how much you like a bike that talks back. 9. Budget and development. If MotoGP was a movie, it would be a blockbuster with an unlimited CGI budget. These teams spend millions on a single season, and that's before you start counting the cost of test programs, spare engines, or the occasional mid-season upgrade package that costs more than a luxury yacht. Every component can be made from exotic materials, every design tested in the most advanced wind tunnels, and every problem solved by a small army of engineers with laptops. The bike you see at the first race often isn't the same one you see at the last. They evolve constantly. WorldSBK, on the other hand, is more like a high-budget indie film. Still plenty of talent, still fantastic production values, but there's a ceiling. Teams have to work within a tighter budget, which means choosing upgrades carefully and often sticking with what works instead of chasing every tiny theoretical improvement. The result? You see more continuity through the season, fewer radical experiments, and occasionally some clever budget engineering solutions that make you wonder why MotoGP didn't think of it first. Money changes the game, not just in what's possible, but in how often you can change it. And MotoGP has the resources to change constantly. 8. Tires. MotoGP tires are like high-strung divas. When they're in the right mood, they'll give you the performance of a lifetime. But the clock starts ticking the moment they hit the asphalt. They're designed for peak grip over a very short lifespan, meaning a rider has to manage that sweet spot carefully. Too aggressive early, and you'll cook them before the checkered flag. Too cautious, and you'll never get them hot enough to bite properly. Choosing compounds is a strategic gamble, with front and rear choices often deciding the race before it starts. WSBK tires, currently Pirelli, are closer in concept to ultra-high-performance street rubber. They still offer ridiculous levels of grip, but they're built with slightly more flexibility in terms of heat cycles and longevity. This makes them more forgiving, especially in mixed conditions, and better suited to the multiple race weekend format. It also means that tire development in WSBK often filters down to road bikes you and I can actually buy. In MotoGP, that kind of trickle-down is slower and more selective. The difference here isn't just about grip, it's about philosophy. MotoGP's approach is win the next 45 minutes, while WSBK's is win all weekend without killing the tires. 7. Brakes. MotoGP braking systems are the stuff of legend. Carbon discs that can bring a bike from 350 kilometers per hour down to a crawl in seconds. The trade-off? They only work like that when they're hot. Cold carbon brakes are almost useless, which is why you'll see riders weaving and dragging the brakes even on the sighting lap just to get them into the right temperature window. The feel, once hot, is incredible, linear, powerful, and confidence-inspiring. But if the weather turns cold or damp, it can be a nerve-wracking challenge to keep them in their optimal zone. In WSBK, steel discs rule the roost. They're heavier and don't offer quite the same ultimate stopping power, but they work across a wider range of conditions. You don't need to baby them into temperature, and they still bite hard enough to make your eyeballs rattle. For a rider, that means a more predictable, consistent braking experience, even if it's not quite as breathtaking at the absolute limit. This is one of those areas where the difference isn't about which is better, but which is better suited to the series. MotoGP's carbon brakes are perfect for the sprint-style GP format. WSBK's steel brakes are built for the real-world variability of production-based racing. 6. Electronics. MotoGP's electronics suite could double as a fighter jet's control system. We're talking adjustable engine braking maps, multiple traction control modes, wheelie control, launch control, and even ride height devices that can be deployed mid-lap. All of it is fine-tuned to fractions of a percent, and every change is logged, analyzed, and fed back to the rider in post-session debriefs. The goal? Give the rider every possible tool to go faster while staying within the razor-thin margin between grip and disaster. WorldSBK electronics are no joke either, but they're simpler and more standardized. They're still highly advanced, far beyond what you'd find on a showroom bike, but the rules keep them closer to production-based systems. This means less experimentation and fewer wild solutions, but also more direct relevance to road-going technology. In a way, WSBK electronics feel like a refined extension of the bike's natural character, while MotoGP electronics feel like they've built a second brain for the motorcycle. For riders, that changes the relationship entirely. MotoGP bikes can save you from mistakes you didn't even know you made, while WSBK bikes are more about making the most of the feedback they're already giving you. 5. Chassis design. A MotoGP chassis is built like a scalpel, stiff, unyielding, and precise. Every millimeter of flex is calculated for one purpose: maximum speed through a corner with absolute stability. The downside? No hiding from mistakes. Get your line wrong or weight transfer off, and the bike won't adapt. It'll punish you. MotoGP riders are obsessive about setup. Even a 1 millimeter change can transform handling. In WSBK, the chassis still gets heavy engineering attention, but its DNA is different. Born as a production bike, it was designed for varied roads and rider skills. Even modified for the track, it keeps adaptability, more flex, forgiveness, and bump absorption. Formula One versus Rally, both fast, different worlds. 4. Gearbox technology. Watch a MotoGP onboard and listen closely. You'll notice something almost eerie when the rider changes gears. There's no gap, no pause in acceleration. That's the magic of the seamless gearbox. It allows gear changes without cutting power to the rear wheel, keeping the bike perfectly stable during the shift. The benefit is obvious: smoother acceleration, better traction, and less chance of upsetting balance mid-corner or on exit. In WSBK, riders use quick shifters, fast clutchless upshifts, but with a tiny mechanical pause as ignition cuts for the next gear. It's milliseconds, but at the top level, they matter. Seamless gearboxes are buttery smooth. Quick shifters give a mechanical kick, a reminder it's closer to a street bike. Some riders love MotoGP's unbroken surge. Others prefer the raw Superbike connection, automatic genius versus manual feel. 3. Top speed and lap times. On paper, the speed difference between MotoGP and WSBK can look small, often just a few kilometers per hour at the top end or a few tenths per lap. But in racing, those gaps are enormous. MotoGP bikes regularly top 360 kilometers per hour, with the current record sitting over 366 kilometers per hour. WorldSBK machines are fast, no question, but they typically peak just below that mark. The reasons are a mix of engine power, aerodynamics, and that relentless prototype development. Lap times tell an even more interesting story. On tracks where both series race, MotoGP is almost always quicker, even if only by fractions. But those fractions come from everywhere. Later braking, more corner speed, faster acceleration, and less time lost in gear changes. Over a race distance, that means MotoGP riders can open gaps that are hard to close unless you're riding at absolute limit. In short, MotoGP has the edge because everything on the bike is built for speed above all else. WSBK machines are built to be fast while staying connected to their production routes. That difference may be measured in tenths on the stopwatch, but it's felt in full seconds by anyone who's ever tried to chase down a MotoGP bike on a Superbike. 2. Engine power and revs. If the heart of a motorcycle is its engine, then MotoGP runs on pure adrenaline. These engines are small displacement monsters, 1000cc, yes, but capable of revving past 17,000 RPM while producing around 290 plus horsepower. That's absurd for a bike that weighs less than most people's weekend camping gear. The way they deliver that power is just as intense. It's a constant surge that doesn't let up until you shut it down. It's why even seasoned racers describe MotoGP acceleration as violent in the best way possible. WSBK engines are no slouches. They're also 1000cc in most cases, but they're based on production power plants. Even with heavy modifications, they tend to rev lower and produce slightly less horsepower than their GP counterparts. The upside is more accessible power delivery and a curve that's friendlier to riders who aren't living in the upper stratosphere of the rev range all the time. This makes them a little more predictable, especially in tricky conditions. Still, make no mistake, a WSBK bike will try to rip your arms off if you give it too much throttle. The main difference is that a MotoGP bike will do it faster, harder, and with a scream that sounds like it's tearing the air itself apart. 1. Bike origin. This is the root difference, the one from which all the others grow. MotoGP bikes are pure prototypes. They're not sold to the public, they're not based on any showroom model, and they're designed without compromise. Engineers start with a blank sheet and build the fastest possible motorcycle that fits within the rules. Every part is bespoke, from the engine internals to the smallest bolt. They're the Formula One of motorcycles, machines you'll never see in traffic because they're simply not made for it. WSBK bikes start life in the real world. They begin as production superbikes you can, in theory, buy if you've got the budget and the skill to ride one. From there, they're stripped, modified, and rebuilt into race machines. The rules require them to stay close enough to their showroom siblings that parts and overall architecture are still recognizable. That doesn't mean they're slower or lesser, just that they keep one foot in reality while MotoGP floats entirely above it. This origin story shapes everything from cost to chassis feel, from engine development to the way the bike talks to its rider. At the end of the day, it's the clearest dividing line between two worlds that share a track but live in completely different universes. At the end of the day, MotoGP and WorldSBK aren't rivals so much as different species. One's pure prototype perfection, the other's a production-born powerhouse, and both deliver edge-of-the-seat racing in their own way. MotoGP pushes tech to the limit. WorldSBK proves how far road bikes can go when unleashed. You don't have to pick a favorite. You just have to appreciate the craft. If you enjoyed this ride, hit like, smash subscribe, and drop a comment. Are you team prototype or team production beast? And if you've ever tried chasing one of these monsters, I want to hear that story.